There is a terrifying beauty in the solitude of the chosen. The masses crave noise, distraction, and shallow companionship to silence the aching emptiness of their souls. Yet those who have glimpsed something beyond refuse such counterfeit remedies. They do not cling or grasp. For as the prophet Isaiah declared, "In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength." Isaiah 30-15. What is strength if not the power to remain unmoved when the crowd trembles? These men and women see beauty in silence, grandeur in solitude, and majesty in the quiet chamber of the spirit, where truth breaks forth like dawn. But why does this serenity unsettle others so deeply? Could it be because the very presence of one who has shed illusions exposes how fragile their own scaffolding of lies truly is? To the unawakened mind, such people appear distant, perhaps even arrogant. Yet arrogance is not the absence of need. Arrogance is hunger disguised as pride. What you see in the chosen is not haughtiness, but freedom, freedom from performance, freedom from bending to fit a mold. King David knew this paradox when he wrote, "Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him." Psalm 37-7. Stillness is not weakness, it is a fortress. Psychologists would call this the dismantling of social masks, stripping away roles until only the essence remains. The world applauds the wise from afar, like tourists admiring a cathedral's spire without stepping inside. But to truly know them would mean stepping into the nave of reality, where stained glass illusions shatter and raw light burns the eyes. Do you dare step inside? Or will you cling to the comfort of painted shadows? History whispers warnings through its villains. Considère Diotrephes, mentioned in 3 John, who loved to be first and rejected the truth. His end was isolation, not born of heaven's refining fire, but of corruption's rot. How many today repeat his fate, building empires of deceit only to be crushed under the very stones they laid? As Job 5:13 proclaims, he catches the wise in their craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are swept away. When you study the chosen one's path, does it not strike you as the exact opposite? Their loneliness is not punishment, but architecture, an invisible scaffolding of heaven, raising them toward the dome of breakthrough. Artists have captured this mystery far better than preachers at times. In Handel's Messiah, the swelling chorus, "For unto us a child is born," erupts not from noise but from silence prepared, echoing how heaven births power out of hidden places. Or recall the paintings of El Greco, where elongated figures stretch heavenward as though solitude itself were a ladder to God. In the same way, the chosen one becomes elongated in spirit, stretched between earth and eternity. How could the ordinary ever comprehend such vertical resonance? Nature preaches this truth. The cedar of Lebanon grows tallest where the winds are fiercest. Its solitude on the mountain ridge, the very reason for its height. The deep sea lanternfish, glowing in utter darkness, teaches that light does not need an audience to be real. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1-5. Can you not feel how these echoes of creation mirror the solitary radiance of those pressed by heaven into aloneness? But not all examples belong to scripture or saints. The Spanish painter Francisco de Zurbarán, often overshadowed by his contemporaries, spent long seasons of obscurity painting monks and martyrs alone in shadow. His solitude was his teacher, shaping an art so honest that it pierced centuries. Similarly, business magnate Howard Schultz once admitted that before Starbucks became a global name, He endured years of ridicule and isolation, yet, as he said, dreams are free. The journey is not, what if your own isolation is not a cage, but the narrow corridor before a palace door? Ordinary lives testify as well. I once met Elena, a seamstress from a forgotten village, who told me she had no friends after her conversion because neighbors mocked her prayers. Yet years later, every young woman in that village sought her counsel in secret, calling her the quiet mother of faith. Her aloneness had become a reservoir others would one day drink from. Did she ever imagine that the rejection of her peers was the refining that would make her a pillar for the broken? Jesus himself warned of this paradox. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. John 15:18. Loneliness for the chosen is not a void, but an antechamber. Like an architect drafting blueprints in silence before the cathedral rises, heaven sketches your destiny in the dark before it unveils it in the light. Physics teaches us resonance. When two frequencies align, they amplify each other. Your solitude tunes your soul until it resonates with the frequency of heaven. And when that resonance meets the right moment, it will amplify into a breakthrough no crowd could manufacture. Therefore, do not fear emptiness. Embrace it, for it is not emptiness at all, but holy excavation, clearing space for glory. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Stand tall. Chosen one. Let the world misinterpret your silence. Let them call your aloneness weakness. Let them mock what they cannot understand. Your breakthrough is being drafted like the dome of a cathedral, and heaven itself is the builder. Rise now, for your freedom is not loneliness, it is the gate to eternity. It is not bitterness that drives the chosen into solitude, nor resentment that seals their path. It is simply the inevitable consequence of piercing through layers of illusion woven by society. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. Freedom carries a price. The more truth you absorb, the harder it becomes to play games that once felt vital. Small talk becomes hollow. Gossip sounds static, and the endless race for validation appears like a child's contest in a crumbling playground. Can you feel how absurd the chase for applause looks once you've glimpsed eternity? Most of humanity does not hunger for truth. They hunger for comfort. They do not want revelation. They want reassurance. They prefer the lullaby of tradition over the trumpet of awakening. Yet as Jesus said, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. Matthew 7:13. What happens when someone dares to walk that narrow path? They become strangers to the familiar world, not because they despised it, but because the world no longer recognizes their frequency. Doesn't it strike you that the awakened are treated as outsiders, not for hatred, but for resonance too high to be heard by the crowd? And yet, this outsider does not judge. They carry no superiority, only clarity. They see why people clutch at illusions: fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of losing ground. Fear that if they tug too hard at the curtain, the stage itself will collapse. Perfect love drives out fear. 1 John 4:18. But love requires courage, and courage is rarer than diamonds. Think of the desert cactus, surviving where nothing else grows. It does not hate the barren sand, it simply thrives above it. The awakened move in the same way. They do not impose their revelations, because truth cannot be forced into another's lungs. It must be breathed willingly. The Bible is full of those who bore this lonely fire. Elijah sat under the broom tree wishing for death, yet found God not in the earthquake, nor the fire, but in the gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:12. Isn't that whisper the same voice heard only in silence? In contrast, villains have always clung to illusions until they consumed them. Think of King Saul, introduced as Israel's chosen, but destroyed by his obsession with approval and control. His need to appear strong fractured his soul, and the kingdom slipped through his fingers like dust. Those who refuse truth always pay with collapse. The architecture of lies cannot bear weight. Nature confirms this law. The Arctic fox survives by turning white in snow, invisible to predators. Adaptation in solitude is not weakness, it is mastery. The awakened adapt in spirit, camouflaging from society's traps while carrying a fire. No camouflage can hide from heaven. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. Psalm 145:18. Why does the fox endure winter with such resilience while humans crumble at silence? Perhaps because animals do not fear being alone, they fear only betrayal of their design. What if the same is true for us? And so, the chosen carry on, their steps steady, their hearts unshaken. They are not here to prove themselves, but to live in alignment with what eternity has already written. Truth cannot be bartered or forced. It is a flame that must be chosen. For this reason, the call is clear. Do not run back to the comfort of the crowd. Do not drown yourself in their illusions. Rise instead into the stillness, for your solitude is not exile, it is consecration. Stand, chosen one, and let the world tremble as heaven reveals your breakthrough. Those who awaken to truth do not waste breath arguing, because they know most hearts are not truly asking to be set free. They are only begging to be reassured. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. 2 Timothy 4:3. Isn't that what we see everywhere? Crowds seek comfort instead of clarity, applause instead of alignment. The distance that forms between the awakened and the slumbering is not deliberate. It is the natural fracture that occurs when light refracts through glass. One beam becomes many, and the one who sees cannot step back into the prism of illusion. And the more one stands in this pure light, the more the shadows of the world shrink away in discomfort, leaving them isolated yet unshaken. Their silence becomes louder than the crowd's noise, and their stillness exposes the frantic pace of those still asleep. Friends begin to drift like continents on tectonic plates. Conversations that once felt effortless now echo like hollow chambers. As the Apostle Paul admitted, "For now we see through a glass, darkly." 1 Corinthians 13:12. But the awakened soul has pierced the veil. Should they then return to the old world, just to fit in, to pretend for the sake of fragile companionship? Can one willingly go back into chains once freedom has been tasted? The temptation whispers, but the awakened cannot obey it. For truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. Just as a cracked bell cannot be recast in silence, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the earth's crust, this separation may create earthquakes in relationships. Yet those quakes are proof that foundations are shifting into something new. Their absence from the old circles becomes a silent testimony, a constant reminder that another way exists, one that terrifies those who refuse to walk it. And yet, this separation is not born of coldness. The awakened often feel more love than ever before. a compassion that overflows without condition. Jesus described this paradox when he said, "Love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back." Luke 6:35. Love without expectation is a river that flows endlessly. But isn't it strange that unconditional love is the most misunderstood? People demand reassurance, demand that friendship bend into a mirror of their insecurities. But pure love is not a mirror, it is a fountain. The awakened learn to give without strings, and in doing so they reflect heaven's own nature. It is a current that cleanses even those who curse it. Yet many despise it because they cannot control it. Their resistance to such love reveals the poverty of their own souls. Like dry soil rejecting rain, it cannot absorb. Science itself testifies to this pattern. In physics, resonance occurs when one frequency vibrates in harmony with another, amplifying both. But when frequencies do not match, no matter how much energy is forced, harmony never comes. Is this not the hidden explanation for why awakened hearts find old conversations unbearable? The frequencies no longer resonate. In architecture, it is like trying to insert a Gothic arch into a modern steel frame. The forces do not align, and collapse becomes inevitable. The heavenly blueprint will not bend just to soothe human loneliness. This is why silence is not emptiness but calibration, like a violin string being tightened until it carries the exact tone the symphony demands. Without this tuning, the music of destiny would be nothing but dissonance. Loneliness becomes the rehearsal room where heaven aligns your frequency to its eternal score. Ordinary lives carry this truth. I once spoke with a bus driver named Miguel, who told me that after he overcame addiction, most of his drinking companions left him. At first he was shattered, wondering if sobriety had cursed him with loneliness. But years later, as he carried schoolchildren safely every morning, one grandmother stopped him and said, "You saved my grandson's life by just showing up sober." Miguel told me he realized in that moment that his isolation had been heaven's training ground, tuning him for a mission bigger than companionship. Doesn't his story prove that separation is not rejection, but refinement? And what is refinement but the fire that burns away the dross so that only gold remains? Miguel's story whispers to every lonely heart, your pain is not pointless, it is purposeful. His bus became more than transport. It became a sanctuary where his redemption quietly carried others toward safety. Scripture offers warnings through its tragic figures. Think of Demas, once a co-laborer with Paul, who abandoned him because he loved this present world. 2 Timothy 4:10. His craving for reassurance, for comfort, for the old illusions cost him an eternal legacy. Isn't that the same path many walk when they retreat from awakening back into the arms of distraction? The awakened one knows better. They do not return. For no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Luke 9:62. Those who cling to the crowd's illusions may win applause, but their legacy dissolves like sandcastles at high tide. Demas stands forever as a warning. The pursuit of comfort over truth always ends in obscurity, and yet his shadow serves as a contrast, highlighting the brilliance of those who endure the fire of solitude and emerge unbreakable. The conclusion is thunderous. You cannot go back. You cannot dilute truth into palatable illusions for the sake of fitting in. Your separation is the resonance of heaven, adjusting your frequency. Your compassion is not weakness, but overflowing strength. Your silence is not emptiness, but the scaffolding of eternity. Stand now, chosen one. and embrace the river of unconditional love that flows through you. Do not fear misunderstanding, for your very existence is proof that heaven is building something greater. Rise, and let the world witness the architecture of truth unveiled through your life. For when you stand, you are no longer alone. You are aligned with the eternal chorus, a living cathedral, built not by human hands, but by the breath of God Himself. The world mistakes solitude for arrogance, silence for indifference, and authenticity for coldness. They believe that unless one constantly seeks validation through endless participation in the collective dream, something must be wrong. Yet the truth is far simpler. The awakened do not reject people. They refuse to pretend. They will not forge relationships that are hollow, nor waste words on conversations that serve no purpose. They will not play in the theater of drama, conflict, or emotional games. Better is a little with righteousness than much gain with injustice. Proverbs 16:8. If relationships are merely distractions from emptiness, why should the awakened submit to them? And here lies the paradox. While the world runs tirelessly from loneliness, the chosen have learned to sit with it until it transforms into light. Their refusal to compromise unsettles others because it exposes the emptiness of superficial bonds. It is not arrogance, it is the courage to live without masks. For the chosen, solitude is not a prison to be feared, it is a sanctuary to be cherished. It is not loneliness, but peace. This is the great divide. While most flee from their own reflection, filling their days with noise, distraction, and frantic activity to drown the silence, the awakened sit within the silence and discover something astonishing. The emptiness they feared is not emptiness at all, but a vast and limitless expanse of awareness. Can you feel the terror of those who realize that by avoiding silence, they have been running from their truest selves? The psalmist proclaimed, "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. Stillness reveals what endless activity cannot the throne of God within the human heart. In this stillness, the awakened no longer chase. They receive, no longer bound by time's frenzy. They breathe eternity into each moment, and as they rest, others watching cannot fathom how such peace is possible without distraction. Those who awaken have faced this inner abyss and discovered it to be a temple. They have stopped running, and in doing so, they have met themselves fully. They do not chase after people, nor do they crave to be chased. They simply are. This unshakable presence is foreign, unsettling even, to a society addicted to neediness. Imagine encountering someone who does not seek your approval, does not hunger for your validation, does not bow to the invisible rules of shallow engagement. How does one relate to such a presence without trembling? Is this not the very reason people drift away, not from dislike, but from incomprehension? Jeremiah himself lived this, rejected by his own people. Yet God said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Jeremiah 1-5. The chosen are marked by heaven in ways the world cannot decode, and their mere existence becomes a silent confrontation to everything shallow around them. The scriptures testify that this path has always been misunderstood. Jeremiah stood alone, mocked by his own people. Yet God declared his calling before birth. Even Christ himself withdrew often into the wilderness, praying through the night in solitude. For his strength was not in the approval of men, but in communion with the Father. And still, people whisper the same accusation today. He is arrogant. She is cold. Are they not repeating the same blindness as those who once said of Jesus, "He has a demon and is mad. Why listen to him?" John 10:20. History adds more echoes. The Italian painter Giorgio Morandi, misunderstood for painting simple bottles in silence, was accused of detachment. Yet his art taught generations that stillness reveals infinite meaning. Like Morandi's bottles, the chosen seem plain on the outside, yet contain worlds within. And just as in Mozart's great Mass in C minor, where the quiet Kyrie bursts into transcendent harmony, their solitude erupts into unseen glory. Ordinary lives bear witness. A young farmer I met in a small village confessed that after he stopped gambling and chasing shallow friendships, his companions abandoned him. Yet in time, his quiet life of discipline inspired others. They began sending their children to learn from him how to till the soil with care. Isn't it powerful that a man once mocked as boring became the teacher of endurance and growth? His solitude taught him how to listen to the soil, how to sense the rain before clouds gathered, how to work with rhythms that others ignored. He told me, when I stopped wasting time with them, I finally had time to learn the language of my land. His story shows us that solitude is not a loss of connection, it is the restoration of deeper connections to life itself. And through his discipline, his silence became an inheritance for the next generation. But there have always been those who chose the opposite path, the villains of distraction. King Belshazzar of Babylon filled his halls with drunken noise, mocking God by drinking from the holy vessels of the temple. Yet Daniel records that suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall. Daniel 5:5. That night the kingdom was taken from him. His craving for noise over silence, distraction over reverence, ended in judgment. Is that not the inevitable end of those who cannot endure solitude? Belshazzar's feast was not strength, it was decay dressed in gold. And how many today, drowning in endless noise, are writing their own destruction without realizing it? The silence they fear will one day be forced upon them. But by then it will be the silence of collapse. The conclusion is fierce and unshakable. Solitude is not exile. It is consecration. The awakened are not empty. They are overflowing with a fullness too great to be understood by those still bound to illusions. Stand, chosen one. Embrace the silence that terrifies others. Let your stillness become thunder. Your solitude, a cathedral not built with human hands. Rise and show the world that you need no approval. For heaven itself has already sealed you with eternal validation. And when you rise, the world will tremble, not because you sought their applause, but because heaven's resonance cannot be ignored. In the silent pact to pretend, the world finds its comfort. But the awakened refuse such agreements. There is a terrifying beauty in solitude, for it is not isolation, but a return to what is real. It is stepping away from the static of human noise and into the cathedral of existence itself. Here, life is lived without masks, without the suffocating demand to perform, without the endless need to be something for someone else. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Psalm 20:3-1-2. Isn't that what the awakened have discovered, that silence is pasture and solitude is still water? And yet, how many fear to drink from it, because it means letting go of illusions they cherish. They fear that in losing their illusions, they will lose themselves, yet in truth, they are only shedding chains. Their terror of silence reveals how fragile their foundations really are. There are moments when longing whispers, When the old ways tempt the heart with promises of companionship, the memory of laughter in crowded rooms beckons like a phantom. But deep down, the awakened know such connections would be hollow, built not on truth, but on mutual illusions. To return would be to rebuild a house of straw, knowing the fire is already lit. What partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? 2 Corinthians 6:14. Does this not reveal why they walk their path alone, not as outcasts, but as those who have outgrown the need to belong in a world still drunk on dreams? Their separation is not punishment, but transformation. It is the shedding of skin, like a serpent, growing into a new form. And in the same way, each step forward leaves behind the husk of what no longer serves life. The serpent does not mourn its skin, nor does the awakened mourn the ties that no longer fit. Most people assume friendships are formed through deep connection, shared values, and mutual respect. On the surface this appears true, but when the awakened look beneath the facade, they see something fragile, relationships woven from shared illusions, agreements never to question, pacts never to disturb the dream. And when one dares to awaken, those bonds shatter like glass. Jesus warned of this when he said, "You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved." Matthew 10:22. Isn't it haunting that loyalty often lasts only as long as the illusion is intact, like a spider's web? These bonds look intricate, but collapse with the first storm. And what is a friendship built on illusion but a mask two people agree to wear together? When one tears off the mask, the other recoils in fear, unable to face the unfiltered truth. Such relationships are like stage plays. The audience applauds, but the curtain must always stay closed. Nature itself proclaims this truth. The firefly glows not for company, but because light is its nature, even if no one watches. The radiance continues. The giant sequoia grows in silence for centuries, needing no applause, towering far beyond generations of men who come and go. And the awakened are the same, radiant without recognition, steadfast without validation. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1-5. Do you not see how creation itself whispers the lesson most refuse to hear? The eagle soars alone, yet commands the skies. The deep-rooted oak stands unmoved through storms, yet shelters countless lives. Solitude is not weakness in nature, it is the breeding ground of majesty. The awakened walk the same path, bearing quiet strength the crowd cannot comprehend. But history's villains reveal the opposite fate. Caiaphas, the high priest who conspired against Jesus, clung to the illusion of power and the safety of Rome's approval. He silenced the truth for the comfort of the crowd. But his name is remembered not as a savior of Israel, but as the one who betrayed the Messiah. His desperate grasp for validation left him immortalized in shame. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Mark 8:36. Is this not the eternal warning? Illusions may secure applause for a moment, but they purchase despair for eternity. And just as Caiaphas was swallowed by the legacy of his choices, so too are modern souls devoured by the false security of their masks. Power without truth corrodes from within like rust, and those who seek the crowd's approval end with nothing but ashes in their hands. Therefore the call is unyielding. Do not mourn the loss of shallow ties. The ones who drift away were never anchors, only weights. Stand in the clarity of your solitude, for it is not loneliness, it is consecration. You are not abandoned, you are refined. You are not empty. You are overflowing with a truth too heavy for the crowd to carry. Rise now, chosen one. Let your silence roar louder than their noise. Your solitude burn brighter than their applause. Stand unshaken, for heaven's recognition is greater than any earthly belonging. And when you rise, every illusion will tremble, for your very being becomes a proclamation that eternity has already crowned you. Most friendships are not formed because souls truly meet, but because illusions overlap. People validate each other's beliefs, reinforce each other's fragile worldviews, and provide distractions from the questions they dare not face. For they loved human praise more than praise from God. John 12:43. Isn't that what we see in most relationships? A contract of mutual reassurance, a pact to ignore the abyss within. Human beings are indeed social creatures, yet beneath that longing for connection often lies a deeper fear, the fear of being alone with the echo of their own thoughts. They run from silence as if it were death itself, when in truth, silence is the womb of life. And if silence is the womb, then solitude is the cathedral in which new creation is born. But how many have the courage to step into that cathedral? Friendships are often constructed like architecture, without foundation walls of common interests, ceilings of shared routines, decorations of cultural habits. They look sturdy, but the materials are paper and plaster. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Matthew 7:26. When storms come, such houses collapse. Is this not why so many connections dissolve the moment one begins to awaken? To question reality is to shake the scaffolding that held the entire building together. Conversations once engaging now echo like empty halls. Dramas, once thrilling now, appear as stage plays in a theater of shadows. The awakened begin to notice the hollowness of the framework itself, and when they step out, others cannot follow, for they are terrified that without illusion, nothing will remain. The one who begins to see beyond surface life naturally feels the old bonds unravel. It is not because they are incapable of love or friendship. On the contrary, their love grows deeper, more expansive, unshackled from need or validation. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. 1 Peter 4:8. Yet how strange it seems that unconditional love is so threatening to those who rely on reassurance. The awakened no longer cling to the same attachments, and this makes them incomprehensible to the crowd. Isn't it unsettling to meet someone who refuses to play the endless games of success and status? Their very presence questions the values of the room without a single word. And what is more terrifying for the unawakened than to be exposed in silence? Psychology might call this cognitive dissonance, but physics calls it resonance. When frequencies no longer align, harmony cannot exist. Is this not why conversations feel like static once awakening begins? Architecture reveals the same truth. A Gothic arch cannot rest on a weak foundation. If the geometry misaligns, collapse is inevitable. The awakened are like a recalibrated frequency, vibrating at a higher resonance, which causes the old bonds to crack under the strain. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Romans 12:2. What feels like isolation is actually recalibration, a tuning of the soul for the symphony of heaven. In the pauses between battles, athletes train in silence. In the gaps between wars, nations rebuild in quiet. Isn't it clear that transformation always happens in the stillness between storms? Ordinary lives reveal this mystery. A seamstress named Anna once told me that when she stopped chasing gossip and began spending her nights sewing garments for orphans, nearly all her old friends abandoned her. They said she had changed too much. Yet, years later, brides from her town lined up to wear the dresses she stitched, each one carrying a piece of her devotion. Her solitude, once mocked, became the thread that held others' joy together. Isn't it powerful that those who mocked her absence now wear the fruit of her silence? Her story proves that when heaven tunes a soul apart from the crowd, it is never to diminish, but to multiply. Scripture warns us with examples of those who clung to illusion. Gehazi, servant of Elisha, chose greed over truth. He pursued Naaman's gifts in secret. And the prophet declared that leprosy would cling to him and his descendants forever. 2 Kings 5:27. His hunger for validation and wealth shattered his destiny. Is this not the fate of those who cling to false bonds rather than walk in solitude? They gain temporary treasures, but forfeit eternal inheritance. What is highly valued among men is detestable in God's sight. Luke 16:15. Illusions reward with applause, but truth rewards with eternity. The conclusion stands like thunder rolling across the heavens. Solitude is not your weakness. It is your sanctification. You are not abandoned. You are being rebuilt on a foundation that cannot collapse. You are not voiceless. Your frequency is being tuned to heaven's resonance. Stand, chosen one, and do not fear the unraveling of old ties. For every illusion that falls away is making space for a kingdom unshakable. Rise now, for you are the architecture of eternity, and your silence is the anthem of heaven. Human beings often bond not over truth, but over mutual illusions. In a silent contract, they agree to keep certain ideas alive: gossip, complaints, shared fears, shallow ambitions. People cling to these agreements because they believe belonging requires conformity, even when conformity destroys authenticity. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Matthew 18:7. But what happens when one awakens and no longer plays the game? What happens when someone stops viewing life as endless competition? When they refuse to measure their worth by applause or success? The fragile foundation of such friendships begins to crumble. And isn't it frightening for those still asleep to see one among them suddenly step out of the script? There is an unspoken rule. To belong, you must perform. You must echo the group's reality. You must agree to its unchallenged truths. If you dare to refuse, if you no longer find meaning in what entertains others, you become an outsider, not because you hate them, but because they no longer know how to relate to you. Do not be surprised. My brothers and sisters, if the world hates you, 1 John 3:13. The awakened often find themselves sitting in rooms where conversations feel like echoes of emptiness. Isn't it unsettling to realize how much of human talk exists only to fill silence, to avoid the mirror of one's own soul? People gossip to escape their own shadows. They complain about the world to avoid questioning their own choices. When one stops participating in these rituals of distraction, the crowd drifts away. Yet isn't that drifting proof that your frequency has shifted to another realm? At first, this solitude may sting. The loss of companionship can feel like rejection, like exile from the tribe. But over time, solitude reveals itself not as abandonment, but as purification. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. The outsider discovers that rejection is in fact redirection, alone with silence. The awakened begin to sense eternity beneath the noise. Could it be that what feels like loss is the scaffolding of a higher architecture being built over time? What was unsettling transforms into serenity. The soul sees that heaven has not removed people as punishment, but cleared space for unshakable foundations. History whispers this same truth through unexpected lives. The writer Fyodor Dostoevsky, once condemned to death before his sentence was commuted, wrote that the soul is healed by being with children, yet much of his own life was marked by profound solitude, misunderstood and often ridiculed. He discovered through isolation the ability to expose the hidden sickness of society. Isn't this what happens to the chosen, misread, mislabeled, yet secretly carrying truths too heavy for the crowd? And in sacred music, one hears this in Allegri's Miserere, where a single soaring voice rises above the choir, carrying silence into sound so holy that even centuries later, listeners weep. Such moments remind us, solitude is not silence, it is resonance with eternity. Ordinary life bears witness. A woman named Clara, once mocked for leaving her high-paying job to care for abandoned animals, told me, "At first I felt utterly alone, like I had destroyed my future. But over time, those animals taught me more about loyalty and love than people ever had." Years later, her shelter became a refuge for families across her city. Isn't it astonishing that the very solitude others scorned became the soil where her true calling grew? What appears as loss is often only the pruning before fruit. The scriptures also give us villains who clung to illusions. King Jeroboam, fearful of losing control of his people, built golden calves so they would not worship in Jerusalem. His need for validation birthed idolatry. And 1 Kings 13 records how his hand withered when he stretched it against the man of God. His downfall was not random, it was the natural collapse of a life built on illusion. Do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, Galatians 6-7. Is this not a chilling warning for anyone tempted to return to the crowd's applause? The conclusion stands unshakable. Solitude is not your rejection. It is your coronation. What others call arrogance is your freedom. What they call loss is your liberation. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. 2 Timothy 4:17. Rise, chosen one. Do not fear the unraveling of shallow ties. Let your silence thunder louder than the world's noise. And let your solitude become the sanctuary where heaven unveils your destiny. Beyond the illusions that once glued shallow friendships together lies a painful truth. Most people desire to be heard, but almost none want to truly listen. Most crave support, but recoil. When challenged, they surround themselves with those who soothe, not those who sharpen. The time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine, but will suit their own desires, gathering teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. 2 Timothy 4:3. Is this not the very condition of our world today? Comfort over correction, illusion over truth. And when one awakens, when they pierce through these layers of social illusion, they stop supplying the comfort others seek. They become something different, neither friend nor enemy, but unsettling. Like a mirror that refuses to flatter, doesn't it disturb those who would rather dream to suddenly meet someone awake in the middle of the performance? This is why the awakened often find themselves with fewer friends. It is not because they lack love or care. In fact, their love has grown purer. It is because they no longer pretend, no longer stitch together counterfeit bonds, simply to avoid solitude? Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? If I was still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Galatians 1:10. Real friendship cannot be built on illusion. Yet most relationships are little more than rehearsals of safety, rituals of mutual denial. Isn't it tragic that many would rather sit in a circle of lies than stand alone in truth? The awakened refuse to play roles that feel empty, and as they step aside, others drift away, not because hatred has formed, but because truth has made fellowship too heavy for fragile illusions to bear. Nature itself whispers this law. The pearl forms only in irritation, hidden inside the oyster, far from sight. The desert blooms brilliantly, not in crowds, but in barren silence where no one expects beauty. And the awakened are the same, growing in solitude, becoming radiant in places others fear to tread. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the rose. Isaiah 35:1. Could it be that your solitude is not absence but a hidden garden waiting to burst into bloom? And why does the world fear those who blossom alone? Because it exposes that they too could flourish, if only they dared to endure the silence. The scriptures also preserve chilling lessons from those who clung to illusions. Ananias and Sapphira. In the book of Acts, pretended generosity while secretly holding back, craving approval without surrender. Their deception cost them their lives at Peter's feet. Acts 5:1-10. What destroyed them was not a lack of resources, but the obsession with appearances. Isn't it terrifying to realize that illusion itself can kill? Their story is a mirror. How many today are building friendships, careers, reputations that look whole on the outside but are hollow within? There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Proverbs 14:12. The awakened know that truth will always thin the crowd. Real bonds are not erased, but refined. They no longer settle for companionship born from distraction, but for unity forged in light. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. Ecclesiastes 4:9. Yet if no companion remains, heaven itself fills the void. For Christ promised, "Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." Matthew 28:20. Rise, chosen one. Do not fear the unraveling of shallow ties, for they were never anchors, only chains. Your solitude is not a curse, it is consecration. Let your silence terrify illusion, and let your truth scatter every counterfeit bond. Stand now, for heaven itself walks beside you. Not all human connection is an illusion. There are rare friendships, precious, fragile as jewels, that transcend the usual dynamics of social interaction. These are bonds not built on shared gossip, mutual convenience, or cultural rituals, but on something deeper, recognition. Two souls suddenly see each other as they are, without masks, without demands. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Proverbs 27:17. Isn't it remarkable that such relationships do not need to be forced? They emerge like stars at night, appearing only when both individuals have reached a depth of awareness where they no longer need anything from each other. But how many are truly willing to love without need, without illusion, without strings? And how often do we confuse intensity with authenticity, forgetting that true connection often speaks in whispers rather than noise? These rare bonds are not trophies to display, but sanctuaries where the soul can finally rest. For most, Friendship serves as a mechanism to preserve the status quo. Bonds are built on convenience, shared distractions, and silent agreements never to disturb reality too deeply. For they loved darkness instead of light, because their deeds were evil. John 3:19. When one in the friendship begins to see beyond, when their eyes pierce through the veil, the relationship unravels not because of open conflict, but because the scaffolding of illusion collapses. Isn't it haunting that what holds so many relationships together is not truth, but avoidance? The moment avoidance ends, the bond dissolves like mist under the sun. And yet, is it not better for false ties to dissolve than to live chained to shadows? This unraveling, though painful, is a kind of mercy. It frees both parties from the exhausting weight of pretending. This is why the chosen often walk alone. They do not cling to relationships for the sake of appearances, nor force conversations that feel like hollow rituals. They refuse the endless cycle of validation, reassurance, and drama that masquerades as intimacy. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? 2 Corinthians 6:14. Could it be that solitude is not punishment but a higher alignment? The awakened embrace solitude not as a curse, but as their natural frequency, a resonance vibrating with heaven itself. Like physics reveals, two waves cannot remain bound if their frequencies diverge. Resonance dies when alignment is lost. In architecture, a misaligned arch eventually collapses under its own imbalance. So too do friendships built on illusions. They cannot withstand the gravity of truth. And what feels like loss is often the scaffolding being dismantled so that heaven can raise a stronger cathedral. Isn't the silence of construction proof that something new is being built? Ordinary lives bear witness to this principle. A fisherman named Thomas once told me that after he quit cheating in business and started selling honestly, many of his former companions abandoned him. They said I was stupid for losing easy money. He laughed. But the silence I gained was worth more than gold. Years later, families came to trust only him, saying, "We buy from Thomas because we know his hands are clean." Isn't it powerful that the friendships he lost were the very weight that prevented him from rising? His solitude became the harbor where others found safe waters. And he discovered a truth many overlook, that the absence of false friends made room for the presence of divine favor. The empty tables of yesterday became the feasting tables of today. What he thought was subtraction was in fact multiplication. The Bible warns through tragic examples. Lot's wife, unable to release her ties to Sodom, looked back when God commanded escape. She turned to salt, frozen between past and future. Genesis 19:26. Her fate was not merely punishment, but revelation. Clinging to illusions petrifies the soul. What fellowship can light have with darkness? 2 Corinthians 6:14. Doesn't her story prove that refusing to let go of false bonds keeps one forever trapped? How many today are frozen in the same posture, unable to move forward because their hearts are chained to what God has already judged? The story of Lot's wife is not just ancient history, it is a mirror warning every soul that nostalgia for illusions can be fatal. The conclusion is thunderous. Solitude is not exile, it is sanctification. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. Psalm 145:18. You are not abandoned, you are being refined. You are not empty, you are filled with a frequency too high for the world's ears to hear. Stand, chosen one, rise above the ashes of shallow bonds. Let your silence thunder as proof that heaven itself has claimed you. And when you stand, you will see that solitude was never loneliness. It was the throne room of God preparing you for destiny. For every chain that breaks, a crown is forged. For every illusion that fades, truth takes its rightful seat. And when you walk forward, heaven itself walks with you. Most relationships are not born of truth, but of shared perception. Illusions woven together to create the fragile sense of belonging. People gather not because they have discovered reality, but because they echo the same dreams, the same fears, the same shadows. Yet the awakened do not chase after companionship, for they know that what is real will find its way to them in its appointed time. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:1. Is it not liberating to realize that there is nothing to fit into because the world itself is trapped in its own masks? While others panic at solitude, the awakened rest in it, like air no longer suffocating, but free. And here lies the paradox. Those who surround themselves with endless people are often the most lost, while those who stand alone in truth discover themselves unshaken. Crowds rush to fill their emptiness with noise gatherings, conversations, rituals of distraction, yet their hollowness only deepens. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Psalm 27:1. The awakened one knows better, for they have faced the abyss within and discovered it is not death but life. Could it be that those who fear solitude are not running from loneliness but from themselves? They clutch friendships, not for joy, but for reinforcement, seeking voices that affirm their beliefs, mirrors that validate their emotions, walls that hide their uncertainty. Isn't this why so many social circles feel like echo chambers, groups that think alike, act alike, and move within the same mental cages? And when one dares to walk another path, to break free of the script, is it any wonder that the group sees them as dangerous? The scriptures remind us that this tension has always existed. Jesus declared, "If you were of the world would love you as its own, but because you are not of the world, therefore the world hates you." John 15:19. Those who diverge from the norm unsettle the foundations of collective illusion. They disrupt the silent contract to never question, never dive deeper, never disturb the fragile balance. To step away is to expose the weakness of what others cling to. Isn't it unnerving that one person's freedom feels like a threat to another's comfort? The chosen know that truth does not require the crowd's applause. Instead, their silence becomes judgment. Their peace becomes a mirror to others' unrest. History testifies through remarkable lives. The sculptor Auguste Rodin once said, "I choose solitude because in solitude I can hear my own soul." Ridiculed at first for his unconventional art, he endured isolation only to later shape masterpieces that altered the language of sculpture. His solitude was not loss but revelation. And in sacred music, the Stabat Mater of Pergolesi carries this same haunting truth, voices rising in sorrow and beauty, weaving grief into transcendence. Is this not what solitude does for the chosen? It transforms what others fear into the architecture of eternity. In ordinary lives, this mystery breathes. A baker named Elise, from a small town, confessed that when she stopped gossiping with her old friends and dedicated her nights to baking bread for the homeless, she lost nearly all her companions. But years later, families lined up every morning at her shop, saying her bread tasted like hope. Isn't it extraordinary that her so-called loss was in truth the beginning of her legacy? Her solitude fed not just her soul but the hunger of many. Yet Scripture also warns us with villains. King Saul, desperate for the validation of his people, disobeyed God's command to win their approval. In 1 Samuel 15:24, he admits, "I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them." His craving for the crowd cost him his crown. Doesn't his downfall illustrate what happens when illusion is valued over truth? Those who cling to shallow affirmation may keep their friends for a season, but lose their destiny forever. The conclusion resounds like a trumpet through eternity. Solitude is not your downfall. It is your coronation. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you. Deuteronomy 31:6. Rise. Chosen one. Do not mourn the circles that dissolved, for they were never your anchor. Let your silence speak louder than their noise. And let your solitude declare that you belong not to the shifting crowd, but to the unshakable kingdom. When the awakened step outside the invisible framework of illusion, their very presence becomes a silent challenge. They do not need to speak, for their being itself exposes the fragility of the system others have unconsciously agreed to uphold. Have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? Galatians 4:16. Isn't it striking that people are drawn to what is familiar, not because it is true, but because it reassures them? And when someone no longer participates in the play, they suddenly appear as an anomaly, impossible to categorize, impossible to tame. This alone unsettles those who crave the safety of sameness, for truth carries an energy that the crowd cannot domesticate. In every social circle, there exists an unspoken contract. We will support each other's views, reinforce each other's narratives, and maintain our shared illusions. But the moment one refuses to sign this contract, the balance shatters. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. Isn't this why the awakened feel both free and alien? Their refusal to echo the emotional rituals of the group is not rebellion, it is revelation. They no longer seek validation from borrowed voices, nor do they bow to the idols of belonging. And yet, isn't it strange that this quiet refusal feels more dangerous to the crowd than open hostility? For silence rooted in truth is louder than the chorus of lies. Nature itself proclaims this mystery. The owl hunts at night, needing no applause for its wisdom. Yet every creature in the forest feels its presence. The coral reef flourishes unseen beneath waves, building cities of beauty while storms rage above. And the awakened are the same, thriving outside the spotlight. Unseen, yet undeniable. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1-5. Doesn't creation itself prove that true power often operates outside the gaze of the crowd? The eagle does not seek the flock, it commands the sky alone. The redwood tree stretches upward for centuries, unmoved by the shifting grasses below. In the same way, those who awaken towers in silence, unshaken by the winds of approval. But the Bible warns us through villains who clung to illusions. Herod Antipas, consumed by pride, feared losing face before his guests, and so he ordered the beheading of John the Baptist. His thirst for validation chained him to public opinion, and his name is remembered not for greatness but for blood-stained cowardice. Mark 6:26-28. Isn't it terrifying that the fear of rejection led him to destroy the prophet who carried God's truth? His story reveals the deadly cost of living for the approval of others. The fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Proverbs 29-25. Illusion may preserve reputation for a night, but it always demands the soul by morning. This is why detachment is the chosen one's crown. To walk away from the unspoken contract of illusion is not to lose life, it is to reclaim it. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:10. Stand now. Chosen one, do not shrink back into the cycle of approval. Let your very presence disrupt their fragile patterns. Let your solitude echo like thunder in the chambers of deception. Rise, for heaven has marked you, and no structure of illusion can contain you. When the awakened finally break free from the need for validation, they dismantle the very game most people are deeply invested in. They no longer strive to win arguments, nor feel the compulsion to prove their worth through applause. Recognition and approval lose their grip, for their energy shifts from external validation to internal peace, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:7. Isn't it astonishing that what the crowd calls indifference is often the deepest freedom? This shift makes them incompatible with the fragile scaffolding of social dynamics, where identity is glued together by others' opinions. Yet who dares to question whether the glue itself is poison? Validation is the invisible currency of most relationships. People seek friends who comfort them, who mirror back their identity, who reassure them in moments of doubt. They have healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, "Peace, peace," when there is no peace. Jeremiah 6:14. When one no longer trades in this false currency, they are perceived as cold, uninterested, even arrogant. But isn't the real arrogance clinging to illusions and demanding others to validate them? To stop feeding the patterns of reassurance is not cruelty, it is the truth, and truth always unsettles. Doesn't this explain why the awakened often find themselves misread by those still addicted to comfort? Imagine a group bound by a constant cycle of validation conversations built on mutual complaints, collective désir, and endless affirmations. Now imagine one among them who no longer reacts as expected. They listen, but they do not echo the drama. They observe, but they do not participate in the exchange of false encouragement. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Galatians 6:7. Doesn't this prove that when validation is the seed, emptiness will always be the harvest? The awakened break the pattern, and their stillness exposes the frenzy of those still trapped. Could it be that what others call judgment is simply the reflection of their own insecurity? Science itself reveals the pattern. In physics, resonance occurs only when frequencies align. When they diverge, the system collapses into discord. Is this not why conversations once familiar now feel like static to the awakened? In psychology, this is cognitive dissonance, the discomfort when reality collides with illusion. And in architecture, a misaligned keystone causes the entire arch to fail. No matter how beautiful its carvings, the awakened are like keystones replaced by heaven's design. They no longer fit the counterfeit arch, so the old structure shakes. You also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house. 1 Peter 2-5. Isn't the shaking proof that heaven is building something greater? In ordinary life, this truth shines. Rosa, a retired nurse from Lisbon, once shared that after she stopped indulging in gossip at her local cafe, many friends drifted away. They said I had grown too serious. She smiled. but I discovered silence healed me more than chatter ever could. Years later, neighbors came to her, not for gossip, but for counsel, calling her the quiet anchor of their street. Isn't it powerful that what others mocked as distance became the very thing that drew them back when storms came? Her solitude was not rejection, it was refinement. But Scripture warns us through those who could not abandon validation. King Ahab, manipulated by Jezebel and desperate for approval, allowed idolatry to flourish in Israel. In 1 Kings 21, his obsession with reputation and possession drove him to covet Naboth's vineyard. Ending in judgment, his downfall was not merely about land, but about the illusion that people's praise mattered more than God's command. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. Proverbs 29-25. Isn't it terrifying that the hunger for validation can corrupt even a throne? Those who live for approval will always die by its absence. The conclusion is fierce. Breaking free from validation is not arrogance, it is alignment with eternity. If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. Rise, chosen one. Refuse to trade your soul for applause. Let your silence reveal the falsehood of their noise. Let your stillness dismantle the fragile contracts of illusion. Stand unshaken, for heaven's validation thunders louder than any human voice. And when you stand, the world will know you were never distant. You were always aligned. When people encounter someone who no longer plays the game of validation, they often feel exposed, as though a hidden mirror has suddenly revealed their dependence on external approval. Instead of embracing this presence as an invitation to grow, they distance themselves, running toward voices that will continue to soothe their fragile sense of identity. For they loved human praise more than praise from God. John 12:43. Isn't it haunting that the absence of validation creates more discomfort than the presence of lies? It is not that truth harms, it is that truth unmasks. And who dares face the reality that their sense of self has been built on the reflections they borrow from others? When the awakened refuse to participate in this endless cycle, they leave behind a void that most would rather avoid than explore. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Proverbs 27:5. Isn't this the reason those who walk the path of awareness often find themselves alone, not because they lack compassion, but because they no longer feed the machinery of illusion? They no longer offer the rehearsed reassurances or mirror back identities that others desperately cling to. Their presence becomes a space of neutrality, a quiet understanding, a deep stillness that unsettles those addicted to noise. Could it be that such stillness feels like judgment only because silence reveals what words once concealed? Most people do not seek truth in relationships, they seek comfort, familiarity, recognition, and the reinforcement of what they already believe. The heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Jeremiah 17:9. The moment someone stops providing this comfort, they are labeled cold, distant, or arrogant. Isn't it strange that the one who refuses to lie is accused of cruelty, while those who coddle illusions are celebrated as kind? This paradox of awakening is the crucible every chosen one must walk. The more you see, the less you need, and the less you need, the less the world knows how to categorize you. Doesn't this explain why the prophets were always rejected, not for hatred, but for truth too heavy to be borne? History whispers through voices of art. The Italian painter Caravaggio lived a turbulent life, often misunderstood and even despised. Yet, in his chiaroscuro masterpieces, he revealed divine light, piercing human darkness. His work unsettled the powerful because it exposed shadows they preferred hidden. In the same way, the awakened carry a radiance that terrifies those who live by illusion. And in music, one hears the echo in Mozart's Requiem, moments of silence breaking into thunderous harmony, reminding us that death of illusion is not the end, but the birth of something eternal. Is this not the very sound of awakening, the silence that becomes symphony? Ordinary lives confirm this mystery. A young teacher named Matteo once shared that when he stopped inflating students with empty praise and began challenging them to think for themselves, many parents accused him of being too harsh. Yet years later, those same students returned, thanking him for awakening their minds. Isn't it extraordinary that what was once rejection became gratitude, that what was once scorn became legacy? His refusal to feed illusions created discomfort, but discomfort birthed transformation. The scriptures also record villains who clung to validation. King Saul confessed, "I have sinned. I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them." 1 Samuel 15:24. His downfall was not only disobedience, but the desperate need for approval. Isn't it terrifying that the need for validation cost him his crown? Saul teaches us that illusions may gain applause for a season, but they always demand destiny as payment. The conclusion is thunderous. Solitude is not exile. It is consecration. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118-22. Rise, chosen one. Do not grieve over what has drifted away. Let your silence thunder. Let your neutrality become fire. And let your very presence expose what is false. You are not abandoned, you are set apart. And in that setting apart, heaven crowns you with truth the world cannot comprehend. The more a soul awakens, the less it craves validation. And the less validation it seeks, the fewer connections it maintains, not out of bitterness, nor rejection, but because most relationships demand a mutual agreement to sustain illusion. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Galatians 1:10. Isn't it unsettling that so many friendships collapse when the need for validation disappears for those who step beyond illusion? Solitude is not punishment. It is not loneliness, as the world defines it. It is liberation, a quiet sanctuary of inner peace, where relationships are no longer forged in dependency, but born of true recognition. Could it be that what others call emptiness is in fact the very space where eternity whispers? When a person reaches this state, they no longer fear solitude. They do not grasp for companionship to fill a void, nor do they bend themselves to fit the molds others demand. They move through the world without the need to be seen, understood, or accepted. And in this they discover freedom most will never taste. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. Isn't it tragic that while many chain themselves to shallow approval, the awakened walk unbound? Their existence exposes the fragility of society's foundations, unspoken rules, habits, and expectations that keep the illusion of order alive. The awakened, by breaking this cycle, destabilize the architecture of false security. And is it not true that disruption often reveals what was already crumbling beneath the surface? Society thrives on predictability. When behaviors align, when words echo familiar scripts, when interactions follow the choreography of expectation, this predictability creates comfort, a sense that the world is controlled, orderly, safe. But the moment someone lives outside these patterns, they become an anomaly, an unclassifiable force. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. Doesn't it disturb the crowd that one person's freedom can dismantle the fragile balance of their illusions? The awakened embody a living contradiction, present but not compliant, engaged yet not enslaved. Their very being is a crack in the facade of normality. Nature echoes this law. The lone wolf, though cast out of the pack, sharpens its instincts and often becomes stronger than those who remained bound. The cactus in the desert thrives without constant rain, its hidden reservoirs sustaining it through drought, while weaker plants wither in dependence, and the awakened mirror these truths, self-sustained, resilient, alive in terrains where others cannot survive. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Psalm 92:12. Could it be that solitude is not weakness, but proof of deeper design? A hidden strength the shallow crowd cannot comprehend. But Scripture also warns us through villains who cling to illusion. Pilate, faced with Jesus, declared, "What is truth?" John 18:38. Though he found no fault in him, Pilate handed Christ over to be crucified, fearing the uproar of the crowd more than the justice of heaven. His name is forever etched in history, not as a ruler of strength, but as a symbol of cowardice. Isn't it terrifying that the need to preserve order and approval led him to betray truth itself? The fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Proverbs 29:25. Pilate's story is not ancient, only it is a mirror for all who silence their conscience to keep peace with the crowd. The conclusion is unshakable. Solitude is not exile, it is empowerment. The Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Hebrews 13:6. Rise, chosen one. Do not mourn the loss of shallow ties. Let your freedom unsettle their illusions. Let your silence roar louder than their noise. And let your very presence break the fragile systems of deception. You were never meant to fit into their patterns, you were designed to break them. Stand tall, for heaven's crown rests not on the heads of the crowd, but on those who dared to walk alone with God. When someone awakens and no longer reacts in the expected ways, when they stop engaging in familiar conversations and refuse to conform to the silent agreements that hold social circles together, they disrupt the predictability that most people rely on for harmony. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. 1 Corinthians 3:19. Isn't it shocking that such a subtle change can create such chaos? Their silence alone disturbs the fragile scaffolding others have built to define their sense of belonging. The awakened are not distant or cruel. They have simply stepped outside of the invisible patterns that once controlled them. And could it be that their very detachment is proof of a higher alignment? Most relationships are constructed on mutual reinforcements, shared beliefs, common struggles, and collective perspectives. People bond over echoes of each other's pain, mirroring narratives that validate identity. Two cannot walk together unless they have agreed, Amos 3:3. Yet when one stops participating not by confrontation, but by quiet refusal, the foundation trembles. Isn't it unsettling when the language you have spoken all your life is suddenly met with silence? Those who once felt understood now feel disconnected, as if the bridge that once joined them has been lifted into the sky. Their discomfort does not arise because the awakened have grown unkind, but because illusions no longer find resonance in their frequency. And doesn't physics itself teach us that when frequencies no longer align, Resonance collapses into static. The awakened no longer seek validation through collective struggles. They no longer reinforce narratives that keep others safe within illusions. And they refuse to engage in emotional exchanges that demand approval or reassurance. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. Proverbs 29-25. Their presence itself becomes a silent monument, testifying that another way of existing is possible, a way that depends not on external confirmation, but on truth. For those still chained to the scaffolding of society, this presence feels alien, as if the awakened have stepped into a dimension they cannot enter. Isn't it strange how quickly familiarity can turn into estrangement when one soul begins to vibrate with eternity? Architecture reveals this mystery. A Gothic cathedral can stand for centuries only because its weight is distributed by keystones perfectly aligned. If one keystone is removed, the entire structure quakes. In the same way, when the awakened withdraw their participation, the social architecture trembles. Psychology names this cognitive dissonance, but heaven calls it unveiling. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. Isn't the trembling proof that the old structure was never as solid as it appeared? Ordinary lives testify. A seamstress named Lucia, from a quiet village, once stopped joining her neighbors in their daily gossip circle. At first, they mocked her for being too serious. Yet, in her solitude, she began sewing garments for the poor. And soon people traveled from distant towns to seek her work, saying her clothes carried a peace that felt alive. What her neighbors called distance was, in truth, her doorway to purpose. Isn't it powerful that the very silence they rejected became the song that carried her name beyond her village? Scripture also warns us with stark examples. Demas, once a co-laborer of Paul, abandoned the mission because he loved this present world. 2 Timothy 4:10. His craving for comfort and familiarity pulled him back into the crowd, and history remembers him not as a builder of the church, but as one who walked away. Isn't it terrifying that clinging to illusion can erase a destiny so divine? What fellowship can light have with darkness? 2 Corinthians 6:14. Demas's story stands as a reminder that the need for approval may grant temporary belonging, but it always steals eternal purpose. The conclusion thunders. Solitude is not abandonment, it is consecration. The Lord is near to all who call on him, in truth. Psalm 145-18. Rise, chosen one. Do not grieve over those who no longer walk beside you. Let your silence testify. Let your presence disrupt. And let your solitude roar with heaven's frequency. You were not made to fit their fragile frameworks. You were designed to carry the architecture of eternity. Stand now, for the kingdom waits on your courage. As relationships begin to fade, the shared connection that once brought comfort often dissolves into silence. Rather than question their own dependence on fragile structures, many people distance themselves from the one who no longer plays along. This distancing is rarely announced. It happens subtly. Conversations shorten, invitations dwindle. The warmth of familiarity gives way to an unspoken unease. Do not be surprised, my brothers and sisters, if the world hates you. 1 John 3:13. Isn't it striking that absence alone can feel like condemnation to those who live on constant reinforcement? The awakened see this shift not as betrayal, but as a natural consequence of no longer submitting to illusions. For them, there is no urge to resist or to force what no longer holds meaning. They understand that relationships built on mutual reinforcement collapse when one person no longer needs validation. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118-22. Could it be that solitude, so feared by many, is not rejection but transformation? What others mourn as loss, the awakened embrace as freedom, the revelation that no soul truly needs the applause of the crowd to breathe. Isn't this why prophets of old often walked alone, misunderstood, yet filled with unshakable strength? Jeremiah himself was mocked and isolated, yet God told him, "Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you." Jeremiah 1-8. This solitude is not a void to be filled, nor a wound to be numbed. It is a space of being, where interactions flow not from unconscious agreements, but from genuine resonance. Friendships may still exist, but they are rare, no longer born of necessity, but of recognition that transcends social constructs. Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls. Psalm 42-7. Isn't it astonishing that when illusions fall away, the connections that remain shine brighter than gold? These friendships are not transactional, they are eternal. Like sparks of divine alignment in a darkened world, history outside scripture testifies to this truth. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, often dismissed in his own lifetime, wrote that the crowd is untruth. He endured ridicule and solitude, yet his writings later shook the foundations of theology and philosophy. His solitude was not loneliness, it was the crucible of his calling. And in sacred art, one hears this same paradox in Pergolesi's Stabat Mater, voices rising in sorrow and beauty, carrying grief beyond human borders into eternity. Isn't it haunting that what many feared as emptiness became the birthplace of divine resonance? Ordinary lives echo this law. Elena, a florist from a small village, once shared that when she stopped joining the endless gossip of her peers, she was quietly excluded. But in that solitude, she began tending her garden with greater devotion, and soon her flowers became renowned across the region for their vibrancy. She told me, "I thought I had lost friends, but I gained a garden that spoke back to me." Isn't it extraordinary that the solitude others scorned became the womb of her flourishing? Yet Scripture also reveals the tragedy of those who refuse transformation. Lot's wife, unable to release her grip on Sodom's illusions, looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:26. Her longing for familiarity chained her between past and future, frozen forever. Isn't it terrifying that clinging to the familiar can cost not just progress, but life itself? For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew 6:21. The lesson is clear. Those who worship comfort cannot inherit freedom. The conclusion roars like thunder over the ages. Solitude is not exile, it is consecration. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you. Deuteronomy 30:1-6. Rise, chosen one. Do not weep over the fading of shallow ties. Let your silence preach louder than their words. Let your solitude reveal your strength, and let your very life testify that freedom is not found in belonging, but in becoming. Chosen one. Now you see, loneliness was never meant to break you. It was meant to build you. The silence that surrounded you was not rejection. It was preparation. Heaven isolates what it intends to elevate, and the very solitude that felt like exile was, in truth, the womb of your destiny. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. When God removes the noise of the crowd, it is so you can finally hear his voice. When he allows doors to close, it is because he is leading you to the one door that no man can shut. Loneliness before breakthrough is not punishment, it is refinement. A divine stripping away of what cannot go with you into the next season. The wilderness always comes before the promised land. The silence always precedes the song. And now, I invite you to stand strong. If this message has spoken to your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who is walking through their own season of isolation. Like this video. Leave a comment below and tell us how God is speaking to you. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next word of encouragement that heaven has prepared. To those who have supported this channel through super thanks, and to those who stand with us simply by watching and praying, I thank you deeply. You are part of this divine work, and your presence matters. I bless you now. May the Lord cover you with peace in your solitude, strength in your struggle, and joy in your breakthrough. May your loneliness turn into the loudest testimony of God's faithfulness, and may you walk forward knowing you were never truly alone.